All right.
All right.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the E3SM Biogeochemistry webinar. Today, we're going to hear a presentation about radiocarbon constraints on the carbon cycle by Qing Zhu from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And just as a reminder, this is a webinar series that's run by the E3SM project, where we every month feature a different speaker, either from within E3SM or from the broader community who's doing related work having to do with the biogeochemistry of the coupled Earth system. So that's all I have to say, and then I'll hand it over to Qing Zhu to share with us about radiocarbon constraints.
All right. Thanks, Susanna. And thanks everyone for attending this webinar. So I'm going to talk about our recent work on the radiocarbon modeling, and particularly for the E3SM land model. And we also think about the broader CMIP5 or CMIP6 analysis and try to fit the 14C analysis in within the framework that we already test with the E3SM land model. So the outline will be the 12C cycle of for the terrestrial ecosystem, and just in case some of you are from the ocean side and atmospheric side, so I will probably briefly talk about the 12C cycle, and then more focus on the 14C signal, and more importantly, how do we use the 14C to constrain the 12C? So they cycle through the system parallelly, and it's been a very powerful tracer. That it's just a matter of how can we use those useful information. And then I will give two case studies. One is recently published at GEMS. That's the 14C modeling work, including parameterization, model bias understanding for the E3SM land model particularly. And the second one is that we develop a mathematical framework based on the physics of the 12C, and then try to reconstruct the 14C out of the 12C cycles. So we don't need a 14C physical model at all. We just need a 12C dynamics. And from a physical perspective, we can reconstruct it very precisely. And that work is now under review also at GEMS. And also wanted to mention both papers. They are under the E3SM special issue. So if anyone interested in, we can just follow up. So for the carbon cycle through the terrestrial ecosystem, we wanted to mostly focus on those major processes, and from the observational side and also from the modeling side. So we want to capture the major flow of the carbon through the system and how they return back into the atmosphere. So namely, they are photosynthesis, that's the major carbon entry point into the system, and it brings in the 12C, that's the most naturally abundant carbon, and it also brings in the 14C. So actually both enter into the system through the photosynthesis. And then a large fraction of the photosynthesis, they're going to return back into the atmosphere through the plant respiration. And roughly globally, it's about 40 to 60%. So that's about half. Half of the carbon will be just released into the atmosphere immediately through the respiration. And then the rest, that's the other half of the photosynthesis, they're going to be used for the biomass construction to grow the vegetation, or will flow into the soil through litter and causal debris inputs. And if we assume a steady state vegetation carbon dynamics, so the plants they are not growing, then everything will just enter into the soil and help to build up more soil carbon. And so the important thing is when the carbon flow into the soil, how long they can stay in the soil. And so the soil carbon turnover is really one of the major things that we wanted to, or the experimentalists and also the modeler we care is how long the carbon can stay in the soil. And it matters also for the future carbon projection or climate mitigation, because we know that soil has a larger potential to store carbon than vegetation. And at present day, the size of the carbon stock in the soil is roughly 3 to 4 times higher than the vegetation carbon pools. We know it's larger, and we know the residence time is very long. It's potentially going to be much longer than the plant. So if the carbon they can stay in the soil, and it's going to be very helpful for the climate mitigation and CO2 removal. And in addition to the 12C cycle, through photosynthesis, plant respiration, litter, and soil turnover, we also have a 14C cycle through the system parallelly. And there are two major differences. One is 14C, it decays, radiative decay, with a half-lifetime about 5,700 years half-lifetime. And also it was recently perturbed, so because of the nuclear bomb. And so on the bottom right, we have atmospheric delta 14C signal. Before the nuclear bomb test, it's almost zero. So and also that's the assumption normally used in the model. We assume 0 per mil atmospheric 14C and drive the system around the model. And then at present day, from 1960 to 1970, we impose this atmospheric delta 14C time series, which gives the plant the land surface a lot of 14C, and then it together with the 12C, it cycles through the system. And also from the atmospheric side, after the bomb test, the 14C also declined quickly. So this time series is actually imposed in the model, and in order to represent the before bomb spike and after bomb spike 14C dynamics. So those are the two major differences. And if we can model 12C, and then we adjust the radiative decay and also the historical bomb spike test, then we can model the 14C as well. But 14C was normally ignored in the modeling study. So most often time we focus on the 12C, and this is a very nice CIMI-5 type intercomparison for the Earth system model in terms of soil carbon stock. So it tells us Earth system model really gives us a very diverse prediction or simulated amount of soil carbon down to 1 meter across different models. They give us totally different number from 500 petagram to almost 3,000 petagram, 6 times larger. And fortunately, we have present-day benchmark. So we know down to 1 meter, the soil carbon stock, although it's highly uncertain, but we know the number is around maybe 1,200 or 1,300 petagram. So we can put a threshold there, the horizontal red line, and then we can identify some of the Earth system model that might be more reliable, more realistic in terms of simulating the soil carbon stock. And then we might ask, because we wanted to use those Earth system model to project the future climate or future carbon accumulation over the land surface, then we might want to ask, do those Earth system model, they give us a better SOC estimate at present day? Do they also give us a consistent and reliable future projection? So that's the bar plot on the right. And the answer is that's not the case. Even though those models, they give us a very consistent soil carbon stock at present day, but in the future, the projections, they are highly uncertain, and it's hard to say which one is more likely be the case. And so we wonder why it happens. That's mainly because of soil carbon stock is the emergent property. So it emerged from the net input and also the turnover time of the soil. So if we just focus on the soil carbon stock benchmark or a comparison, we won't get a lot of much of the information in terms of how the carbon really cycles through the system. We just have an emergent number there. So take a look at the what control the emergent SOC stock. We have to care about both the net input, that's the NPP, and also the turnover time. So that's how long the carbon input into the soil can actually stay in the soil. In other words, that's the decomposability. And if we wanted to do a projection, we might also wanted to, the temperature sensitivity will be also very interesting, particularly for the high latitude system. So these bar plots explain why for some models we have sort of reliable SOC estimate at present day, but in the future they're really diverse because they have different NPP and different turnover time, and combine them together, they just offset each other and then give us a consistent number of SOC estimates. But in the future, they're really diverse, they're really different. So really the question is, now we have a relatively better knowledge about SOC stocks. We have multiple databases, frequently used database that harmonize the soil database. And sometimes soil grid is less used, but it's also a big database. And also for the high latitude ecosystem, we have northern circumpolar soil carbon database. But in order to better understand why we have this much SOC stock, we have to decompose and understand at least one of these components, either inputs or the turnover. And in terms of inputs, it's really hard to quantify. We don't have a good database for global MPP. What we have, they're upscaled global GPP from FluxNet, and also maybe multi-space the carbon use efficiency estimate. And that's it. We can convert it to the MPP, but that's not a reliable observational constraint or database. And also maybe for some tropical ecosystems, we have long-term plots, but again, they're not enough to quantify the global dynamics. And so we have to rely on the turnover side of these SOC stock estimates. Unfortunately, we have soil 14C profile all over the world, and we have a lot of samples of soil profiles, and database is growing. So the idea is that we wanted to use at least both SOC stocks and also turnover to constrain the carbon cycle in the Earth system model, rather than just comparing the SOC stock, which is going to be less informative. And this is a very nice study, compile a lot of the radiocarbon profile data. That's more than 150 sites across different biomes, and this is the spatial map showing the location. And usually we have this study and published on Science. So this is the first large-scale comparison between radiocarbon observation and Earth system models in terms of soil turnover and soil age. So the question is, how do Earth system model represent soil age? In the upper panel, we see that the delta 14C, that's the radiocarbon abundance. In the profile, that means in the data. So it's about, the mean value is about minus 200 per mil. But consistently in the model, we see a relatively higher number of delta 14C. So that means the residence time, or the residence time of those models, they are too short. So they're turning over too fast, and the soils in those models, they are too young, and it is quite consistent across different models. Although those models, they give us a different SOC stock estimate. They might be higher than the observation or lower than the observation, but in terms of the soil age or turnover time, they're consistently having a lower residence time and faster turnover time. And on the right, there are global. The left figures, they are site level comparison, and on the right, that is a upscaled version for the global estimate. They don't change much. The messages, they are quite similar. And so what they did, they did one step forward to correct the Delta 14C signal for those Earth system models, and also try to infer how much soil carbon stock is going to be changed if given this radiocarbon constraint. So they use a reduced order model approach with three pools: fast pool, slow pool, and passive pools, and also the transfer coefficient between different pools. So totally, they have 5 parameters to fit, and use all the 12C dynamics from all those Earth system models to fit the reduced order model to tune those 5 parameters, and then use that to constrain the 12C and 14C for those Earth system models. And after correction, we can see that the Delta 14C, in terms of per mil, the bias is largely corrected compared with the profile, and also at global scale, they're quite consistent with pulse scale estimate. And given this radiocarbon constraint, the change of 12C stock is about 250 petagram. That's the mean value of different models. And of course, some models, they have very high bias correction, and some models, they don't. But the mean correction is about 250 petagram. So that's a very good example of how can we use the radiocarbon to constrain 12C given this reduced order model approach. And I want also to mention that this is the first try of synthesizing at global scale 14C data, profile data, and compare with the model. And there is actually a working group, and they put together a database called ISRAD. It is growing faster, very quickly, and also allowing people to submitting data, and then they will handle the data processing. The database is growing and free to use. And so with this, the question is, with this fast-growing 14C database, how can we make use of it and better to constrain our model, the ECSM land model, and maybe potentially also for other Earth system models. So and also for the CLM, the land component of CSM, we have the same issue. They have the same issue of faster turnover time and short residence time. So the black line, solid and dash, they mean the vertical distribution of the 14C, Delta 14C, and before and after the bomb passed. And color lines on the right, the color lines, they mean that's the sensitivity analysis for so-called e-folding factor of soil decomposability across the different depths. So this parameter control how decomposability decline across with depths, and this is a very important parameterization we use to parameterize the change of residence time. And I'm going to come back to this issue also again for the ECSM land model. But here we can see that it's a very powerful parameterization scheme. And by changing from a small number to a larger number, the profile is gradually moving towards left-hand side and is closer to the observation. But it's not close enough because there are also many other factors can contribute to this vertical distribution of radiocarbon profile. And we are going to do more sensitivity analysis in the ECSM land model later. So summary is 14C signal is controlled by the radioactive decay and also perturbed by the nuclear bomb. If we can take care of both, then it's not a difficult task to physically simulate 14C in a persistent model. And in addition, the 14C is a very powerful constraint. We have a very good example how to use a 14C and combine with the reduced order model to constrain the 12C. And we also take a similar, but not the same, a very similar approach, but more physically based and more mathematically based approach, and to use a 14C to constrain 12C for the ECSM land model. And almost all the model, ESM model, we have a very young soil carbon, and ECSM land model also have this issue. So the question is, with this with ISRAD soil radiocarbon soil database, and how can we effectively use those data? Particularly, it's challenging because those data, they are profile data, they're in situ level measurements, and how can we effectively use those data to constrain the Earth system model at grid cell level? And also, how can 14C data actually to inform the 12C model development? So we're not satisfied by just do the bias correction. We wanted to know why it's biased, and then lead to later on a physical correction. So saying introducing new mechanism or change the parameterization scheme, something like that. And so the case study one will be is the 14C in the Earth system land model. So this is a very quick overview of the modeling approach. So we have 0 per mil atmosphere because that's before the bomb spike, during accelerated spin-up and also regular spin-up. And also the 14C always do the radiative decay, and the half-life is about 5,700 years during the spin-up. And also the decay is also accelerated during the accelerated spin-up. The 12C and 14C both accelerated. So we can make sure that 14C is also equilibrated. And during the transient simulation, we just impose this atmospheric signal of delta 14C, and then simulate the transient response of transient dynamics of 14C in the plant and also in the soil. And we have a much larger observational network compared with the 2016 UG's paper. It's over 600 measurements. But again, they are in situ measurements. So we have to come up with a framework a comparable framework between the model and the data. So we decide to use to extract the grid cells, and they have at least 3 profiles within that grid cell, so that we can tell the variation of 14C signal for that grid cell informed by the data, and also we can compare with the model simulation for that particular grid cells. And here are just the spatial distribution and the zooming for the European country and also the U.S. North American countries. Those profiles, they mainly concentrate over those regions. And here is a 12C carbon density down to 1 meter. And so the black circle, that's the observation, and we can also tell the uncertainty or the variation that is informed by the dashed blue line purely from the observation, and the red line is the data. So we can see that for SOC, these are just some examples because we have 70 sites. So I don't show them. I show every site here. I just show some representative sites, and those numbers 3, 12, and 15 they correspond to the numbers here on the global map. So for the soil carbon density, the model performance is quite reasonable, but the issue is when we compare, again, also for those sites, when we compare SOC and also compare the delta 14C. So we see that for the shallow soil, that's probably fine. So before, let's say upper 50 centimeter, that's probably okay. But in between 50 centimeter and also 1 meter, the model is consistently biased towards a younger soil. So again, we have this issue consistent with other system model, and we hypothesize that the soil decomposability parameterization, that's mainly the Z-tau parameterization scheme, that bias lead to the young soil at deep soil layer. So, meaning we might wanted to have a different Z-tau at deeper soil, if that's helpful. And also the second hypothesis is the fresh carbon input. So we might have too much fresh carbon input down to the 50 centimeter because our parameterization of the rooting profile distribution. So based on these two hypotheses, we did a sensitivity analysis perturbing the Z-tau. That's the E-folding factor of soil decomposability across depths, and also perturbing the rooting profile parameterization. We have Jackson rooting profile and also then rooting profile. They're different. Here we can see that in terms of the delta 14C, change of rooting profile is less effective of changing of Z-tau. And also, when the Z-tau is reduced, largely reduced, let's say 60% reduction, that corresponds to the blue line. And we have a we bias correct the simulated 14C vertical profile by a lot. And it seems to be very powerful. But if we combine it with the SOC stock or SOC carbon density, we will see that those two, they don't necessarily be compatible. So blue line meaning a smaller number of Z-tau will correct the 14C signal, but at the same time it biases the 12C carbon stock or carbon density. So that means we may want to consider in a different way, because here the hypothesis one soil decomposability parameterization has the internal assumption is that the Z-tau is consistently distributed across the soil. So we have a one single Z-tau everywhere for the topsoil and for the deep soil. And implicitly we assume that because the Z-tau that's a single number or the same across depths, we assume that those unconsidered factors, so Z-tau actually means to represent those unconsidered factors on the soil decomposability. If it's consistent across depths, then we assume those unconstrained factors, they are exactly the same across soil, and that may not be the case. So here is just a test of the idea of if we use a variable Z-tau across depths, how much benefit we can get. So combining these sensitivity analyses, and we just for different depths, we can freely pick up the best Z-tau and the best estimate for 12C and 14C together, and how much model data fit we can get. And it turned out it's very powerful. So if we allow the Z-tau to change, we can mostly get the 14C correct and also 12C is less accurate than the delta 14C, but it again also is very it's much better than the consistent z-tau sensitivity or parameterization scheme. So then the implication is we might want to consider heterogeneous z-tau at this stage, at the first stage, because it benefits model data fit, and also in the next stage we can learn from the vertical distribution of z-tau and to say something about the real physical constraint or control of this change. So why z-tau change across depths? What's the underlying mechanism or the controlling factors, so that we can improve the physical model to replace this z-tau factor. That's our ultimate goal. And also we do a machine learning approach to further analyze the bias, the model data misfit in terms of 14C and 12C. And here we have we did this for different soil depths. And the main message here is that we see different controlling factor or contributing factor towards the model data misfit or bias at different depths. At 10 meters, that's the top soil or shallow soil layer, we have air temperature, organic matter density, plant functional type, and soil order, those as major contributors to the bias. But at deeper layer, 70 centimeter and also 1 meter, I didn't show the 1 meter depth, but it's consistent. Those environmental factors, temperature, doesn't play a role. That's the plant functional type and also organic matter density mainly control the bias at depth. So it again may confirm our hypothesis before that the rooting depth is one of the major issues, because that really relates to the plant functional type. So these bias analysis really tell us there is a reason for the vertically heterogeneous z-tau, and the reason is they have different controlling factors. In order to really really represent the change of decomposability across depths, we might want to consider a specific mechanism rather than we just use a consistent z-tau across depths. And more importantly, with that assumption, we never gonna get the 14C and 12C correctly at the same time. They kind of offset each other. So summary is that the ELM, the E3SM land model, deep soil carbon is too young. It cycles too fast. And also after tuning, we can effectively bias correct the model 12C and the 14C at the same time. So the bias is largely removed. And also we suggest a heterogeneous z-tau at different depths because of the reason or the controlling factor behind these z-tau, they are different. And for the second case study, we again also use the system line model, but the purpose was for the CIMIC 5 or CIMIC 6 models. For other Earth system models, we demonstrate the approach works for the E3SM land model, but this approach is actually can be generalized. So again, we have the same modeling protocol: accelerated spin-up, regular, and transient simulation, and a bomb spike. So everything is the same with the first study. And the difference is we don't compare with the data. We wanted to ask, can we reconstruct the 14C given only the 12C output variables? So the model couldn't see the 14C, it just see the 12C. And we only tell the model, a mathematical model, the radiocarbon decay half-life, and also the bomb spike, the time series, and see how accurate we can reconstruct the 14C. And this approach is complementary to the to the reduced order model approach that used by UG. And the benefit will be it's more physical based. So in the UG's 2016 paper, she fit a reduced order model with just one single representation, 3 pools and the transition among those different pools, fit to all those Earth system models. They might have those, but the pool representation and also the carbon flow in those Earth system models, they might be largely different. So now we allow those diversity representation about in terms of 12C diversity, and we just use those 12C outputs from whatever system model we have, and then hopefully we can reconstruct the 14C out of it. Okay, so just a little bit of math. I won't get into it too much, but just wanted to mention that the carbon cycle model, actually we can, from a mathematical perspective, it is subject to the mass conservation law, so we can just solve it as a compartmental system. And there is a semi-analytical solution of it. We can tell the carbon stock at a given time, and given the initial state and also the so-called transition matrix. And so the difficulty is to mathematically reconstruct this transition matrix, and it is time evolving depending on the initial condition out of the system. So here we can just treat the B matrix as something that we can immediately learn from the model output of 12C. And we use that to reconstruct the time evolving 5, that's the transition matrix, and use that to analytically solve our the trajectory of soil carbon, that's a C. And apply this to the radiocarbon reconstruction, we can use the same transition matrix, and the only difference will be the radiative decay. So the B matrix, that's exactly the same for 12C and 14C, except here we have a lambda term, that's the radiative decay. And applying that radiative decay term into the transition matrix, again we have we can reconstruct the 14C transition matrix out of the 12C transition matrix. Just need to add another additional term to represent the radiative decay. So that is the mathematical framework that we use to first reconstruct the 12C transition matrix, and then reconstruct the 14C transition matrix, and then solve the 14C dynamics. So here is an example. We pick up 3 sites. Boreal forest, that's one of the frequently measured, 14C frequently measured sites at one of the Siberia sites, and also temperate forest, that's a harbor forest, and Manaus, that's a tropical forest site. So we initially test at those 3 sites. Different lines represent different times, so before and during and also after bomb spike. So we can clearly see the shift of the 14C, delta 14C signal from a small number to a from a negative number to a positive and also larger number, because of the bomb spike. And the dots, they are the reconstruction, and the line, that's the model simulation. So without giving the 14C dynamics at all into the mathematical system, those dots, we can see that they can really represent those lines very well, very accurately, and the bias analysis tells us that for the boreal sites and also for the tropical sites, the reconstruction is almost perfect. The bias is very, very low, almost ignorable. And only for the temperate forest sites, we may have some bias up to less than 0.2%. That the reason is we have more obvious seasonal cycle of the 12C input and also the 14C inputs. Introduce a fluctuation of sort of high frequency, relatively high frequency fluctuation compared with the annual dynamics. that introduced a little bit bias, but still the bias is very low compared to the uncertainty that we have in the 14C data and also the 12C stock data. So the reconstruction is very successful, and so the potential will be we can reconstruct any model for any model in the CIMIC 5 or CIMIC 6, reconstruct the 14C with only the 12C cycle, those output variables from those models, and also we don't need to develop 14C physical model for a system model. We can just save the developmental efforts and just use the mathematical reconstruction, and it works perfectly well. And also, we can make use of the benchmark, radiocarbon benchmark data sets and assess the soil age and turnover time more accurately between the model and also the data. And given the fast-growing 14C database, I think this approach will contribute to that and very well. So the conclusion will be the 14C database or the 14C profile data is a very powerful tool for studying the soil 12C cycle, but we wanted to pay attention to the spatial scale because those database they report in situ level measurements, and the Earth system model normally simulated grid cell about 100 kilometer by 100 kilometer grid cell. And more importantly, in order to have a high fidelity Earth system model, we wanted to get both 12C and 14C right. That means we wanted to get both 12C stock and 12C residence time or turnover time correct in order to have a confident projection of future carbon dynamics. And a good number of 12C or the SOC stock at present day in the Earth system model doesn't necessarily tell us the reliable future projection trajectory on the different climate scenario. And also, we see very different controlling factor at shallow and also deep soil, and lead to the hypothesis of having different z-tau parameterization, different z-tau value for different layers. And finally, our mathematical reconstruction approach can reconstruct the 14C dynamics out of the 12C dynamics for any given Earth system model, and we hope that's going to be very helpful for the CIMIC 6 type of analysis. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Qing. I'm going to end the recording now, and then we can have a discussion.